Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here bright and early for our Wake Up with Research. I'm Celestina Barbosa-Leiker, Executive Vice Chancellor for Research and Administration here at Washington State University Health Sciences Spokane. I'm extremely excited for all of us to be back together again. To start, I would like to acknowledge the land that we sit on and occupy as the traditional home of the Spokane Tribal Nation. We take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land. For those of you who haven't joined us yet for a Wake Up with Research, this started about 2.5 years ago during the pandemic. It was all virtual, of course, and we were very pleasantly surprised that we had such great attendance across the state of Washington. Everyone was able to Zoom in or watch over YouTube. We are recording this session, even though it's all in person here, and it will be uploaded, so we still will be able to have that reach, but we certainly were excited to have everyone back together again in person. For those of you that don't know, our academic year started in mid-August, so as you leave today, you'll see all the students and just all the nice hustle and bustle of our campus. It's really nice to have everyone back here. So how did Wake Up with Research come to be? Well, we wanted to make sure that we were telling our research stories, that we were using the backdrop of the state of Washington to let everyone know of all of the wonderful things that we're doing here on the Health Sciences Spokane campus, not just here in Spokane, but across the state, nation, and globally as well. Our researchers are doing phenomenal work here in their labs here out in the community with tribal partners. We have everything, so much research going on here on our campus: addictions, cancer, autism, chronic disease, tribal research, community-based research. The list goes on and on. If some of you watched Wake Up with Research before, we even did a full presentation on all of our COVID research that we have going on here. So I want to recognize an organization that's doing its best also to improve the quality of life for those in our community, and that is our sponsor for today's Wake Up with Research, our partner, Providence. So joining us this morning on behalf of Providence is Dr. Ken Isaacs. Dr. Isaacs has two roles this morning. His first role is as the Regional Medical Director for Providence Neuroscience Institute, and his second role is that he also serves as the director of WCU's Steve Gleason Institute for Neuroscience. Dr. Isaacs.
Thank you, Celestina. It is truly a pleasure to be here and to see all of you and to know that we're all here together. We're very much for the same purpose. I want to thus welcome you, but also tell you a little bit about our partnership, which is so vital here between Providence, so I'm wearing that hat, and the Gleason Institute for Neuroscience and WSU wearing that hat. These are both dedicated to the care of our neurodegenerative disorders in that focus, but let me tell you a little bit about Providence itself and our neuroscience program to give you some foundation there. Our neuroscience program at Providence is the largest neuroscience program between Seattle, Portland, and the Mayo Clinic. We have some 60 providers of neurologic care, both neurosurgeons, inpatient, outpatient neurology, 24/7, the largest stroke program in the region, as well as our wonderful program at St. Luke's, which is part of our neuroscience program led by Dr. Greg Carter right here. Dr. Carter is the CMO. He's also a national recognized leader in ALS and has been foundational in the development of the work between us, both at Providence, where he is located, and as well as the Gleason Institute for Neuroscience. Part of that role is really to lead the clinical research. Providence is our clinical arm, our clinical leg of the Gleason Institute. It's where clinical care occurs and where the clinical research occurs under that leadership that I was just mentioning. So I'm very excited that you're all here to learn about the Gleason Institute of Neuroscience for Neuroscience and to understand a little bit more of how that functions and how our partnership with Providence works well. So thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Thank you. We very much appreciate our partnership with Providence, so thank you for that sponsorship for this Wake Up with Research. Ken, if you don't mind, I'd love it if you can give the audience here just a brief background on how the WCU Gleason Institute started, just so that it can be a nice backdrop and framework for our researchers today.
Well, thank you, Celestina. It really, you start at the beginning. Where's the beginning? And the beginning is with Steve Gleason. Steve Gleason was, of course, an athlete here at WSU. He was football, baseball, and then went on to the Saints. It was in New Orleans, and made a really spectacular performance there, and made a big difference. But his story in many ways starts with his then coming down with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. As you all know, I believe, a progressive neurodegenerative disease with progressive paralysis. It is really from that beginning that it started, and instead of just stopping like some do, he has been an inspiration for the care of ALS and other neurodegenerative disorders as we're undertaking across the nation. It's been impressive. Steve and his friends actually started a nonprofit organization, Team Gleason, located in New Orleans, and have been instrumental, as mentioned, in the recognition of ALS and degenerative neural diseases similarly, and actually got the Congressional Gold Medal for his work. In 2019, January, we actually, with Team Gleason and leadership here in Spokane, set forward the collaboration that became the Steve Gleason Institute for Neuroscience. I'd just point out that Team Gleason is still engaged, Steve is still engaged, Steve is still participating, and his presence is felt. He was actually just recently at our Adaptive Technology Center, which I'll tell you about in just a moment here. So I mentioned earlier the component of our work which is with Providence, the clinical care component and the clinical research. You have to think of that as one pillar of the Gleason Institute for Neuroscience. The other two pillars are our deep discovery research in neuroscience across all of WSU, the 5 campuses. The foundational research and the mechanisms of disease and so forth. The third pillar is our Adaptive Technology Center. Our Adaptive Technology Center is unique in the, not only the Northwest, probably the nation. It is a leading center in the demonstration of the type of equipment that supports the care for patients and caregivers with these types of disorders. And I'm going to talk a little more about that in a moment, but it's led by Teresa Whitlock-Wild, who has been instrumental because of her husband's ALS himself. She has deep knowledge in it of the needs for what people require, and has been instrumental in the development of the Adaptive Technology Center. Well, the Gleason Institute, I've described it 3 pillars, and really the characteristic is that this is an interdisciplinary effort. It really is some place where patients, caregivers, researchers, students, educators, policymakers all can come together with the focus of improving the life of those with neurodegenerative diseases. And not only ALS, because we cover, that's the foundational component that comes from Steve Gleason, but it's broader too to other ones, such as progressive forms of MS, spinal cord injury, which has certain components that we share, related disorders, including then Parkinson's, and then we ultimately anticipate being able to work with Alzheimer's disease, which is, of course, a very major process. I want to just take a moment to also say something about a little more about the Adaptive Technology Center. You'll get a chance to actually, some of you, to visit there. And it's an amazing place. The Adaptive Technology Center demonstrates for patients what they can do to have an enhanced quality of life during the time that they have neurodegenerative disease advancing. It is a place where they can see things that are actually life-changing to them, where doors open, so to speak, that they did not know would open, and that they make different decisions about how they're going to proceed with these disorders compared to what they thought before they walked in those doors. The Adaptive Technology Center is a place where innovation can occur, entrepreneurs can meet. We work closely with Will, Dominique, and others in terms of the biomedical engineering design, Glen House, and so forth to develop new innovations. So it's an exciting place. I want to just close here with a comment that, really in this challenging arena of neurodegenerative disorders, the Gleason Institute for Neuroscience and our partnership is both strong and unique in the three legs and the presentations that we do. And it really represents the spirit of Steve Gleason brought forth to take care of patients and families. We've created a space that all the innovation, the education, and patients can all benefit and work together. So we're very pleased with that. I'd just like to take a moment finally to acknowledge Andrea Lazarus, who is our executive director for our Steve Gleason Institute. And not here, but who some of you will meet, Teresa Whitlock-Wild, who will be at the Adaptive Technology Center. And with that, thank you.
Thank you. The WSU Gleason Institute is a perfect example of how WSU Health Sciences Spokane meets its land grant mission. As many of you know, WSU is the state's university. We are a land grant university, and we partner with folks in the community. We partner with our great clinical organizations here across the state of Washington to really work towards improving the health and wellness of every resident in the state of Washington. So thank you for all you do. Now let's get to our presenters. I know that's why you're all here. 4 research teams received more than $160,000 in seed grants from funding from the WSU Spokane Steve Gleason Institute for Neuroscience for projects related to neurodegenerative diseases. The seed grant awards will advance the Gleason Institute's goal of supporting research and increasing scientists' understanding of how neurodegenerative disease develops, evaluates the effectiveness of therapeutic strategies and new treatments, and develops adaptive technologies to enhance patient and caregiver quality of life. So we're going to start with our first presenter here, Principal Investigator, Dr. Jonathan Wisor, Department of Translational Medicine and Physiology from the Elson S. Floyd College of Medicine. Jonathan.
I thank you. I am honored to have received research support from the Gleason Institute, and I'm very honored to stand here before you for a few minutes and have your attention as I describe for you what it is we intend to do with our research support from the Gleason Institute. So I'm a neurobiologist, and one of the things you learn very early on when you study neurobiology is that the brain is an energy hog. Okay, so the brain makes up about 5% of our body by volume or weight, but it uses about 20% of the energy in the form of glucose that our whole body uses. So it's really an energy hog. And I specialize in the neurobiology of sleep. And so one of the most interesting things about the neurobiology of sleep is that sleep represents a radical shift in our brain's metabolism relative to wake. And we could see that in PET scans, positron emission tomography. And so with this, you measure the rate at which the brain burns glucose. And we're looking here at images of the brain of a human subject as they transition from wake to sleep. Okay? And these images are colorized in proportion to the consumption of glucose by the brain. And so the hot colors, your red, your yellow, your orange, represent a high rate of glucose utilization. And then your cooler colors, your blues, your purples, represent a relatively low level of glucose utilization by the brain. And you could see that when this individual transitions from being awake to asleep, there is this dramatic drop in the consumption of glucose by the brain. And this has profound functional implications for the brain at the biochemical level, which I will try to describe to you through an analogy here. And the analogy is a fireplace, okay? So when you're awake, the brain is burning through that glucose in the way the fireplace would burn through logs, okay? And if you've ever burned some logs in a fireplace, you know that you, over time, will accumulate soot and ashes in that fireplace. And the only way that you can get rid of the soot and ashes in the fireplace is if you allow the fire to die down, let the fireplace cool off, and then you go in there with your tools and you take out the soot and the ashes and you remove them. And then when they're gone, then you can put in some more logs, burn the fire again. And this is essentially what our brain does on a daily basis. We have about 16 hours of time awake where we're burning through these logs of glucose. We accumulate the soot and ashes. Then we go to sleep for 8 hours. The brain clears out its soot and ashes. And then we awaken again, refreshed and face the next day. Well, there is reason to believe that with neurodegenerative conditions such as ALS, Alzheimer's, that the brain is in a disease state that prevents it from effectively removing the soot and ashes. The fire doesn't, I had an animation that unfortunately didn't make it onto the slides, but the fire doesn't quite die down all the way when the brain with Alzheimer's disease or ALS is asleep. And so when the fire doesn't quite die down all the way, the soot and ashes can't be removed as effectively. And so you have an accumulation of soot and ashes that never quite get removed, and over time they rise to levels that are toxic to the brain, which results in a neurodegenerative condition. So this is the model that we're working on in our studies funded by the Gleason Institute. Let me elaborate on those studies just a little bit. This is an interdisciplinary, intercollegiate team here. I've been trying to put this team together for a few years, and it was the funding from the Gleason Institute that finally made it possible for us to have this intercollegiate collaboration between Drs. Gong Chen and Travis Denton in the College of Pharmacy, and myself, and Michelle Schmidt and Christopher Kit Hayworth in the College of Medicine. Okay, Doctors Denton and Chen bring to the collaboration the ability to measure the accumulation of the soot and the ashes, the glucose metabolites in the brains of experimental animals, and so they will be. We do these studies with experimental rodents. They'll be measuring the accumulation of the soot and ashes of glucose metabolism in tissue samples from mice. And on the College of Medicine side, we've got myself and Michelle Schmidt and Christopher Hayworth. We have the ability to monitor in real time within the brains of experimental animals as they transition between wake and sleep the flames of glucose metabolism and monitor the changes in glucose metabolism as the animals shift from wake to sleep. And so with the funding from the Gleason Institute, we will perfect and optimize these assays. We will then be applying them within the context of the mouse models that are available to study as disease models for ALS, Alzheimer's disease. And so, again, thank you for your attention, and thank you to the Gleason Institute for supporting our research.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I'm sure folks have questions. We're going to do Q&A at the very end of all the presenters, so keep them in your brain if you can, or write them down if you haven't had enough breakfast. So next up, we have Principal Investigator Anita Vasavada from the WSU Voiland College of Engineering and Architecture. Anita.
Well, thank you for having me here. It's really exciting, and especially, like John said, the funding from the Gleason Institute allowed me to do work with Dr. Greg Carter and others at Providence, which I've been wanting to do for years and just haven't been able to get everything together to do that. So this has just been a great opportunity, and I'm really looking forward to it. So I'd like to acknowledge, first of all, Dr. Carter, who you'll be hearing about later in a few other of these projects. So what we want to do, so I'm a biomedical engineer. I study biomechanics, particularly of the head and neck system, so how we hold up our head. And so in this context, we're looking at neck neuromuscular function in people with ALS. And so why is this important? So as is obvious, neck strength and head movement control is important for all of us to hold up our head, to interact with the world as a platform for vision, speech, and other senses. And so in people with neurodegenerative diseases, they may have an added challenge, is that they may be using their necks to control a motorized wheelchair. They may need to keep their head steady to use eye gaze control for any of these devices, as you see Steve Gleason using his little computer eye gaze control mechanism. And in addition to that, in ALS, neck muscle weakness is a predictor of respiratory impairment and ultimately survival. And in a subset of small group of people with neuromuscular disease, they develop something called dropped head syndrome, which is essentially where their chin goes down to their chest and they cannot keep it upright and therefore get neck pain, have issues with respiration, swallowing, and of course overall quality of life and their ability to interact with the rest of the world. So what we're going to do is take both patients with ALS and healthy control subjects, and we're going to measure their neck strength. And I have a picture there of someone measuring neck strength. In our lab, we have a small device that measures force. In our study, the people will be upright. I just didn't have a great picture for you. But the idea is that in clinical practice, you do get a qualitative estimate of neck strength, but what we would like to do is put some numbers on that, because I'm an engineer and I like numbers. And so in addition to the neck strength, we want to measure their neck muscle activity using sensors, electromyography on the neck muscles, and document their head and neck posture. And then, as you probably have seen, many people with a neck weakness also use a cervical collar to help hold their head upright. So now we want to see how we're going to fit our participants with a cervical collar if they're not already using one, and then look at how that collar affects their ability to generate strength, and also how it affects their neck muscle activity. We hope that it is decreasing their neck muscle activity to help preserve some of that fatigue. So what we're hoping, some of the potential impacts from this work is to increase our understanding of how cervical collars themselves affect neck muscle function, because that's something that's not very well known. And we hope that this will also give us some more input into design specifications for head-controlled wheelchairs. And working with some of the clinicians, hopefully this will also improve some of the interventions that a physical therapist might make, and also monitor the progression of the disease. So hopefully in the near future, we will be recruiting both people with ALS and healthy control subjects. So thank you very much. And again, thank you for having me here, and thanks to the Gleason Institute.
Thank you so much, Anita. It's great hearing about all of these nice collaborations going on across agencies and institutes. Our next presentation is a duo. Principal investigators, Dr. Greg Carter, Medical Education and Clinical Sciences from the Elson S. Floyd College of Medicine, and Dr. Glen House, Providence St. Luke's Rehabilitation Medical Center. So please come on up, Greg and Glen.
Okay, thank you very much. So, neurological disorders, specifically neurodegenerative diseases and other conditions of the central and peripheral nervous system, can affect bowel function, can lead to incontinence and also severe constipation. So studies over and over have showed that this can negatively affect quality of life in these individuals. So despite these studies that have been shown over and over to say that this can negatively affect quality of life, very little has been done to take on this problem. In fact, there's even studies that have shown that a lot of these individuals, if able to say, to have appropriate control of bowel and bladder function, they'll trade that for ambulation. So they'd rather have that. So from a quality of life standpoint, this can be a significant issue that's basically been ignored. So despite all of this, little has advanced in the last 50 years. So I had an idea, and I've had an idea for a while, but that's only an idea unless you have the rest of the piece of the puzzle. The rest of the piece of the puzzle is standing behind me. Dr. Carter helping me carry this on, our engineering department at WSU that we partnered with, and then that was great, but now we needed the last piece of the puzzle, and that was the funding. And that was the funding from the Gleason Institute and the foundation to support this to move forward. So now that we're there, we're on our way. So I'm going to take it to the next step and show you what we're doing. Next slide, please. So this is the concept. So if you understand that individuals with this neurological problem can have lack of the control of the external sphincter of the bowel. This is leads to a problem, especially when upright, trying to have the bowel movement of the bowel program. And a common solution would be having a stimulant up against the bowel wall, which is referred to as a suppository. Individuals with neurological problems can't retain that because they lose that muscular control. So what we're doing here is basically creating a liquid suppository. But we needed a method to be able to get it to the right location, which is against the bowel wall. And so here we go, and I gave that task to the engineering group, and here's what we've come up with. So we refer to it as the number 2 easy. It basically is inserted into the rectal area against the wall. It's polished and smooth. But we needed a method to take a liquid type of stimulant and put it into a syringe as a prototype and get it to that area. So I then talked to the engineering group and I said, how are we going to get this to get in the right area? And you guys want to talk about the plan on how to do that?
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. My name is Dominic Brenner. I work with Will Cleggan for the Mechanical Engineering and Design Center. So the basic idea is to leave it on. To have a device where we can insert a preloaded syringe and then have a fairly simple mechanism that would push the syringe plunger and squirt the medication out. So we have a variety of capabilities in our machine shop. We can 3D print, we can do mechanical machining, we can do the CAD design, the initial design of everything. So, and we should be able to combine all that and come up with a functioning prototype.
Okay, next slide, please. So these are just some of the more of the dimensions that these guys were able to come up with. So I like their solution. So the problem is, how do we get it there? So there's going to be individuals that have normal dexterity. That's great. There's going to be people with limited dexterity. There's options that we're looking at from a mechanical, you press, you activate, and have the plunger go forward, some battery, electrical operation. So those are all the things that the funding allows us to explore, but this is the basic concept. Okay, next slide, please. So basically what we're trying to do here is we're trying to make a change in quality of life and have a significant impact. And I think with the combination of the three groups, from a medical standpoint, engineering standpoint, and the funding standpoint, I think we're going to be able to get there. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the whole team for coming up here. I don't know if it gets any more interdisciplinary than that. That is a fantastic example of working across disciplines, across institutes, all of that. Thank you so much. Our final presenter this morning is Principal Investigator Dr. Travis Denton from the WSU College of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. Travis.
First of all, thanks to the Steve Gleason Institute for the funding of our project. It is a focus on the main disease, ALS, which Steve Gleason actually has. And our group in the College of Pharmacy and in the College of Medicine, we are a medicinal chemistry group, and we study the development of novel diseases and the therapies for them. In collaboration with Dr. Carter and Dr. Weeks from St. Luke's, we've come up with this wonderful way to identify ALS early. A big problem with ALS, and people have talked to you a little bit about this before, Dr. Isaacs did a really great job. It's very progressive, it's very deadly. Steve Gleason's a really good example of not being deadly. He's had lots and lots of resources and been able to fight the disease and really give us a lot of research into the disease. But most people make it 1 year to 5 years, 1 year to 3 years after diagnosis, which is really not a very long time, right? And one of the big problems is because they get diagnosed very late. It's a really hard disease to diagnose. So a lot of the doctors around the world, they just don't know enough about the disease. You might go in and see your primary care doctor, and they'll refer you to another doctor, and they'll refer you to another doctor. And it'll take up to a year, maybe a year and a half, before you even get into the right doctor's office that would say, oh my gosh, maybe you have ALS. And then you have to go through a battery of tests, and then you have to deal with your insurance, you have to deal with everything, and by the time you might be getting the care that you need, the disease has progressed so far, it's really, really, really hard to come back from. So what we're trying to do is develop a biomarker, or a thing where you can go into the doctor's office, they can take a sample, they can analyze it right there on the spot and say, yes, you have ALS. And that's a good thing to know. You don't want to hear that, but it's a good thing to know really, really early, because then you can get started on your treatment plan a lot earlier than you could before. So what we're doing is actually the work of Dr. Weeks and Dr. Carter. They've determined biomarkers in blood plasma. And one of the things that happens in ALS is lipid metabolism. And some of your lipids that happen inside of your brain and inside of your spinal cord, their metabolism is different when you transition into the ALS state. And those lipids then make their way into the bloodstream, and Dr. Weeks and Dr. Carter found a very positive correlation between these lipids and ALS in patients with it and patients without. And it's wonderful. The problem is when they go from the cerebral spinal fluid to the blood, their concentration goes really, really low, and they're really hard to detect. So what we're trying to develop in the lab is a novel way to detect these lipids from directly cerebrospinal fluid. And that's exactly what we're going to do. There's some beautiful pictures of chemical structures. I'll walk you through these one by one. I guess we'll do that later. Save that for an organic chemistry class. But what we've met, so these they've already been identified. They're very important. We've already developed a super highly sensitive analytical technique to determine all of these. We use ultra-performance liquid chromatography, mass spectrometry. It's a really wonderful technique. It's available here in the College of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences, right here on the Spokane campus. And we're taking samples from artificial cerebrospinal fluid, and then we'll be transitioning to taking CSF from ALS patients, which we've got from the Northeast ALS Consortium, and blank cerebrospinal fluid. So we'll make a positive correlation with that spinal fluid, and then hopefully we can take that to the next level and be able to start analyzing human samples to say, yes, there's an easier way to detect ALS when you come into the clinic. And I can't do this without Dr. Carter, Dr. Weeks. They actually brought me into their wonderful project, and I thank all of you for your time and the Gleason Institute for the funding.
Thank you so much, Travis. So we now have time, briefly, for some question and answer period. So I invite our presenters to come on up to the front. Sorry, Travis, I should have just told you to stand up here. Come on up if you're okay with that, or we can bring a microphone to you too, however you'd like. I'd like to open it up to Q&A. We heard 4 amazing presentations from 4 very different teams, different types of collaborations going on, everything from trying to get a diagnosis earlier for ALS patients to adaptive technology. This is a really great example of donor dollars, research dollars, hard at work. So thank you so much for all who have contributed to this. Do we have questions from anyone in the audience? Yeah, please yell it out. Go for it.
Wisor, I love your analogies. Can you share about the behavioral, like what do people with ALS complain about regarding sleep? I've heard folks with Parkinson's disease have a lot of sleep issues. What are the behavioral characteristics?
Wow, that's a good question, and that's. I don't think I'm
okay.
qualified to answer that, but if anyone else here is. I mean, I think, posture is a big deal when we sleep.
Yeah.
You've got to have the right posture in order to be able to breathe properly when you're sleeping. And I guess, so I have heard anecdotally that individuals with ALS will struggle because they know that their posture is not quite right, and they can't right it themselves. And so they need intervention from those around them to help with that. So that's the one thing that comes to mind to me as a non-expert in that particular aspect of ALS. And if anyone, Dr. Isaacs or anyone else would like to chime in, please do.
I would just mention that as respiratory functions do decline, there are challenges not only from posture, but just from the capacity. And one of the aspects that is demonstrated at the Adaptive Technology Center is the availability of various equipment to support that, including cough assist and other things that make an enormous difference in the ability of patients to actually do well throughout the night, sleep deeper, sleep longer, have restorative sleep, all the things that are essential so that the biology of the brain works well during the day. So again, it connects. This was just great to hear the breadth of the research, and it deals with every aspect.
Thank you. Don?
Another question for Dr. Wisor. So we know during meditation that you can change the brainwaves from the active state closer to the sleep state. Has there been anything looking at whether that improves brain cleaning and maybe helps with clinical deterioration or prognosis?
So you're correct that you can induce the sleep-related brain waves through meditation, and it's been done in a non-diseased population where they actually improve the efficiency of sleep and reduce the need for overt sleep through these meditation techniques. Yes, that has been done, not within the clinical population, not within the neurodegenerative disease context, as far as I know.
Thank you. Gentleman in the front and then right behind. Yes.
For Dr. Vasavada, have you considered Thomas Brown from Genicure? And I wanted to know if you considered flying, hovering animals, which control their neck because they have to find a flower or some nectar source. So they can hover and their body moves all around and their head and their focus stays in.
I haven't looked into that too much. I know there's some neat things being done with pigeons and the way they walk and move their. But
I mean,
I
like hummingbirds and bees. Was one of those.
Right. I haven't worked with those kind of animals, but that's a great idea. Try to use some biomimicry.
Great, thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Mine is a broader question for the whole Steve Gleason Institute. These four projects are amazing. How many projects are there? What is the scope? How many people? I mean, how broad is this?
Great question. Ken or Andrea?
So the Steve Gleason Institute, this first year we've gotten set up with these 4 seed projects. They build on other work that Greg Carter and others have done at Providence. So this is getting out of the starting blocks. So we're excited not only that, as we move forward, we actually have some additional funds to expand some work. For example, we're looking at perhaps working, as was mentioned, on the sleep, and just in general with respiration, CO2 monitor, which is a device that allows you to predict better how overall respiratory function is working in neurodegenerative diseases. Will is Jim Ectiglia at the University of Arizona, so it's very broad that way. This group shows you the breadth of the work and the collaboration with them.
And then if I can just add to that, one of the reasons that we created this, an Institute for Neuroscience in the first place was to help bring, because there are researchers working on various aspects of neuroscience, at all of the WC campuses. So just the creation of the Institute, to help focus that research, to help make connections, to allow researchers, to connect with clinicians or engineers, or, to help make those connections so that we can, deepen what's already going on and make those connections.
Great, thank you. Yes, in the front here, and then we'll go to Michelle.
Dr. Travis, on those biomarkers, how long do you think those are present? Do you think they're there years beforehand, or you get the disease and those biomarkers appear?
That is a super fantastic question. And the biomarkers arrive with the disease. They're always in, and that's why we make painstaking efforts to get a control level that we see every single time that we take from a non-diseased human, and then when we take it from the diseased person, we can tell the difference. So, yeah, once the perturbation happens, honestly, we don't know how long they're going to last because it's a degenerative disease, but actually with the degeneration of the nerves, the increase of the biomarker.
Thank you, Michelle. Oh, yeah,
Can I just make a comment relative to the work that's done in another neurodegenerative disorder, Alzheimer's disease, where just because of the numbers, there's quite a lot of additional research looking for the CSF biomarkers that can occur actually years in advance of the clinical manifestation. So I think the hope here is that similarly, that if you look at the biomarker in the CSF, it will be distinguished early, at the earliest symptomologic presentation, and could be there even somewhat before. So that will be really interesting.
Can I follow up a little bit too? Yeah, it's yes, these actual biomarkers are correlated to ALS, but with these other neurodegenerative diseases, ALS and Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis, as a matter of fact, they can be positively correlated with them, we hope. So if we get a methodology where we have a super sensitive assay, we can then start taking samples from the MS patients, from the ALS patients, from the Alzheimer's patients, and if we can do a strong enough correlation, we can use it for an early detection biomarker in all those different types of diseases.
Thank you, Michelle.
So Michelle Armstrong with SP3 Northwest, we're the early stage life science business incubator, and I'm familiar with a couple of the folks up front. Since Washington State University is a land grant institution, and therefore the application of the research is really what we're all driving for, I know that we've got diagnostics, a couple medical devices. How do you see commercialization as part of that application that meets the land grant institution mission?
I can answer that. Well, I'm sorry. Working with Michelle and the local Spokane County and Washington State, we have a wonderful technology development helping hand, and we started a startup company called Autophage because we do the early detection biomarkers, and Washington State University's Office of Commercialization has been fantastic in helping us patent all of we make small molecules as well. We've got issued patents on those. Devices that can be made, the OC really helps with patenting. So then we can spin those patents out into a startup company, and then those companies, it's completely, because WSU is a land grant institution, it seems like they're really willing to help make technology created within the university available to the rest of the world.
What about others? Does anybody else want to?
Well, I'll just say not so much this project just getting off the ground, but I also teach in the undergraduate bioengineering program. I know that we've had some senior capstone design projects that we have been, I believe I've worked with your group, so I think that's another way that we've been trying to get some of the commercialization and support from the area, the community.
Yeah, I think also from my standpoint, this is a passion of mine, is also like two hats also as business. I have an MBA. I started some medical device companies in the past. I know how it is to go through the funding. Having a great idea and a prototype that works is great, but it stops there unless you can take it to the next level. So you need funding. You need somebody to come in. And I know what it takes to go out and raise money, seed money. I had at my previous company, I have 16 patents. Before we came here, before you announce anything and do a presentation like this on a medical device, you have to get a provisional patent or you lose the ability to it. So you have to have all that kind of background, which we have now. So now we have the ability to just prove concept. And that's why we put the, instead of designing something completely unique for this prototype, we put in something off the shelf, and that was the engineering department. And that's great because we can take all these different chemicals, stimulants, we can try all these different things, prove it, then go go out there to raise the money to create a business to pass it on. I think the ability to pass it on to the next stage to make this and get it out to everybody that needs it is a huge second part that needs to be considered.
Great, thank you. Any other questions here? Yes.
So this is a rather specific question for Dr. House. I'm an ER doctor, and I have taken care of a number of patients that end up in the emergency department for constipation from spinal cord injuries. Looking at your device, it looks like something that's self-administered.
Yes.
Does it require sensation? Because there's a lot of these patients that they lose motor function, but and sensory function, especially the spinal cord patients.
Yeah, and the way that we really focused on the fact that this has to be super smooth. There's products that are that don't do this, but that you can use kind of a basis of how you're going in that direction. But no, in fact, you would anticipate a lot of people don't have sensation. So there needs to be different ways to visualize it, and that's stuff we deal with at St. Luke's all the time.
Great, thank you. Yes, last question.
Yeah, like a top-level question. This is very specific to ALS. Specifically, we've also talked about Parkinson's. We're all aware of the crossover. Is there a path for future research in those different things that we all know kind of intertwine with each other? And I'm speaking from the rare disease space, and I know that ALS is in that space, but they're all somehow intertwined with biomarkers that we need to get earlier intervention and things like that. So is there a path here at the WSU that maybe a neurodivergent center of excellence could happen?
Well, I think I'll kick this over to Yeah, I think the Gleason Institute, is really leading that. Yeah, go ahead, Johnson.
Yeah, exactly. The Gleason Institute isn't just for people in Spokane, it's for the entire WSU system as well as our partners. And it's really neat that you're here. We appreciate that, and the fact that we can, now you've made the connections with the people where when you say we develop new medications in our lab as well. And these medications, it's wonderful because what Jonathan says, when you're asleep, you take care of the garbage. That's what our medications are doing. And the neat thing is that overlaps between Parkinson's, ALS, Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, wonderful amounts of diseases with the same methodology. So, yeah, we're all here willing to talk to anybody with any ideas, and this could be the neuroscience hub for Spokane for sure.
Ken, any final words there on that?
I just want to say thank you for all of you for being here and participating in all the questions, and for our researchers. I know I have even from this more questions for them, but the real point is that as a community working with our WSU breadth of the services, our biomedical engineering design, our SP3 Northwest, working with our clinical partner with Providence, our researchers in clinical work, our researchers in depth from practical everyday to very theoretical, from mouse to human to patient. I think it's just an extraordinary program, and I really look forward to further work on that. And all of your contributions and interest, questions, and participation. Thank you all for being here.
Great, thank you. And thanks to our presenters. Thank you so much. This truly was great to be able to see how research dollars are really, it sounded like almost every research team here was talking about how there was a barrier for collaborating before we had those research dollars to really help with that. Thank you very much to the presenters. Thank you so much for being here. This was wonderful. Our next Wake Up with Research will be on November 16th, and that topic will be child and family health. So right in time for the holidays, we can start focusing on the family there. If you want follow-up for anything that was shared here, please reach out to any of us here, any of the presenters. Please, we're happy to answer additional questions and give you more information about the WCU Gleason Institute for Neuroscience. Anyone that is planning on attending the tour of the Gleason Institute, please head out to the lobby area, and we have some various options. If you have mobile needs or anything else, we're happy to get you over there. And with that, thank you all for joining us here with Wake Up with Research. Go Cougs.